Picture a room full of federal agents at DEA headquarters in Washington, applauding as a Panamanian general steps to the podium to receive a commendation. Now picture that same general, in that exact same month, collecting $1 million every 30 days because his soldiers are guarding a massive cocaine lab deep in the Darien jungle. He managed a client list that should have been impossible. The CIA kept him on payroll for $100,000 a year. At the same time, he was charging the Metal Incarnate exclusive transit fees and routinely selling those same classified American secrets to Cuban intelligence. Each buyer thought they controlled him. The man running this three-way hustle was General Manuel Noriega. Agents working the streets in Miami built legally airtight cases against him, tracing the drugs and the money right to his doorstep. But when those reports reached Washington, those agents were given a direct order: stand down. That forced silence lasted for 23 years. The American intelligence community didn't miss what Noriega was doing. They simply made a calculated decision. His geopolitical utility in Central America heavily outweighed the crimes he was committing to enrich himself. By the mid-1960s, Panama was effectively a country built around a ditch. The Panama Canal remains the most strategically valuable 50-mile corridor on the planet, and whoever controls the local military controls access to it. Langley needed a native officer. Specifically, they needed someone who could feed them reliable intelligence on the leftist movements pushing south from Cuba. He had to be ruthless enough to get results and hungry enough to stay bought. Noriega fit the profile perfectly. As he climbed through the ranks to become Chief of Military Intelligence under strongman Omar Torrijos, he became the ultimate inside source. American case officers handed him envelopes of cash, and in return, he absorbed decades of highly classified CIA methods and operational secrets. The CIA's own surveillance reported that Noriega's intelligence unit used torture, that his political opponents were disappearing, and that his personal wealth was growing far faster than his government salary allowed. They filed those reports, and they kept making the deposits anyway. This was the baseline logic of the Cold War. To the architects in Washington, a compliant, deeply corrupt dictator was a vastly safer investment than an unpredictable, independent democracy. By the early 1980s, Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel were running into a severe geography problem. U.S. Coast Guard and DEA intercept boats were flooding the Florida Straits, effectively choking off the main Caribbean corridor they used to move cocaine north. They needed new infrastructure, and Panama offered everything. It possessed untrackable jungle airstrips, a financial system built entirely on the U.S. dollar, and a dictator willing to lease out sovereign protection to the highest bidder. The terms required zero negotiation. Noriega collected between $100,000 and $200,000 for every plane load granted safe passage. If the cartel wanted to launder the proceeds through Panama's national bank, Noriega took a flat 2% commission. This map shows standard smuggling routes from Colombia to the U.S. Notice Panama right in the middle. The cartel used the exact same airstrips the CIA leased for covert operations. The overlapping routes generated $2 billion annually, while Washington permanently shelved all field reports. By actively preventing their own agents from investigating a protected asset, the United States government had essentially provided an airtight, sovereign shield for the world's most powerful drug syndicate. That protection carried a severe human cost. In 1985, a Panamanian doctor named Hugo Spadafora gathered flight logs to expose Noriega's cartel links. He was pulled off a bus at the Costa Rican border, tortured, and decapitated. His body was found stuffed into a U.S. mail sack. The State Department received a full report on the murder, and absolutely nothing happened. The reason why leads straight to Washington. Congress had just passed the Boland Amendment, strictly prohibiting the Reagan administration from funding the anti-Sandinista rebels in Nicaragua. The White House needed an illegal, untraceable way to keep the money and weapons flowing, so Panama became the hidden architecture for the Contra supply chain. Noriega provided Panamanian military bases as training grounds for the rebels and allowed his banking system to receive the diverted proceeds from covert arms sales to Iran. In 1984, CIA Director William Casey flew to Panama City for an off-the-books meeting. Both men knew absolutely everything about the other's darkest operations. Casey knew about the murdered doctor and the cocaine labs. Noriega knew about the illegal weapons pipelines. They kept shaking hands because of a chilling calculation. If Washington dismantled Noriega, they would dismantle their own Contra supply chain. If the supply chain was exposed, it meant criminal prosecution at the cabinet level. A murdered doctor and thousands of kilos of cocaine were simply logged as acceptable costs of doing business. The secret finally detonated in June 1986. Journalist Seymour Harsh published a front-page investigation in the New York Times, naming Noriega directly as a drug trafficker operating under U.S. intelligence protection. Soon after, the Kerry Committee pulled the literal Swiss bank receipts and subpoenaed the shelved field reports. Noriega had been shielded for so long that he genuinely believed he was untouchable. He brazenly stole the 1989 Panamanian election. When the opposition candidate won by a massive margin, Noriega simply nullified the vote and sent his paramilitaries into the streets to beat the opposition candidates with iron rods. Tensions escalated into daily confrontations along the Canal Zone perimeters. By December, Panamanian soldiers opened fire on a checkpoint, killing a U.S. Marine. That same night, a U.S. Navy officer was beaten and his wife was sexually assaulted in detention. President George H.W. Bush's administration was forced into a corner. The institutional calculus had finally inverted. The sheer political liability of keeping General Noriega in power now drastically exceeded the strategic cost of removing him. On December 20, 1989, 27,000 U.S. troops executed simultaneous assaults across Panama. The goal was compression, using overwhelming firepower to crush a defense force of fewer than 16,000 men within the first 90 minutes. But this was an act of extreme evidence management. Noriega held 20 years of highly classified CIA operations and Iran-Contra routing channels entirely in his memory. Bringing him into a controlled U.S. federal court where testimony could be managed was measurably safer than letting a defiant fugitive sell those secrets to Havana. The collateral damage was devastating. When AC-130 gunships opened fire on Noriega's headquarters in the dense El Chorrillo neighborhood, the surrounding wooden tenements were incinerated. Hundreds of Panamanian civilians died in the rubble of a conflict they had absolutely no part in creating. Noriega eventually surrendered, stepping out of the Vatican's diplomatic mission in his dress uniform. He was convicted in federal court and spent the rest of his life in prison. Meanwhile, every single American official who actively built, funded, and protected his empire walked away untouched. The Noriega file wasn't a failure of intelligence. Every agency had accurate information at every single stage. It was a perfectly functioning system of institutional cost accounting, proving exactly what happens when a superpower decides to balance its geopolitical ledger using the lives of innocent civilians.